Well, good morning. So I took this piece of wood, a 1.5 inch piece of walnut, and turned it into this, a little keepsake box. What I did is I used a tool called the Shaper Origin, which is a handheld CNC machine, to make these cuts to create the box. And then I actually used the same machine to route out the leaves, and then I filled it in with epoxy that was pigmented to get this design. So if you're interested in learning more about this, keep watching, because I'm going to go into detail. If not, this is the end result. I hope you enjoyed it. But let's move a little bit into the detail now. So this piece of walnut came from Bell Brothers. I order a lot of lumber from them. And it, like I said, it's 1.75 inches by about 20 inches. And well, let's measure it. 21 by 6.5. So the Shaper Origin is a handheld CNC machine. Here it is, unplugged, and without the spindle in. Let me get the spindle here. So basically it's taking a trim router. If you're familiar with a router, right, it normally has a base that you hold on to, but this is what's called the spindle. The bit goes in here, and this motor obviously spins that bit at a high speed. This slips into the Origin, and this screen, I'm going to take this out because it's not secure and I don't want to drop it. This screen allows you to do all the onboard programming. So for those that are familiar with Origin, I did not use the CAD program. Because what Origin allows you to do is design on CAD, upload it to the cloud, and then that device is actually connected to the cloud, and you can pull your designs right onto the device. But it also allows you to do on-tool CAD. And what this is here is really just a rectangle with radiuses on the corners. So what I drew on the machine and placed virtually on this piece of board was a 3-inch by 5-inch with 1/4-inch corners twice, okay? And that allowed me to cut the inside of the top. I got some sanding and finishing to do on that. And allowed me to cut the bottom. So I call that the cap and the bottom. So let's look at that. Basically, if you imagine these embedded into this wood, that's what I cut out. And as long as you have an anchor design or placement of that 3-inch by 5-inch rectangle with the radiuses, you can use the offsets in the tool to do all the cuts. So for this, I can't remember. I think this was the anchor. If I measured there, well, let's do it again. I bet you that's 3 by 5. 3 by 5, yes. So the inner part here was the anchor shape. Then from there, with a 1/4-inch offset, I could do this. Now the key that I've learned over doing a couple of these is not to just do a 1/4-inch offset. Do it a little bit greater. Make your plunges, and then, so maybe the offset is 0.26, 0.27, something like that. Make your plunges to get these cuts, and then do the same thing with the true offset, right? And you get a much smoother design, especially in the areas that are very hard to sand. Then, of course, when you make these cuts, you still have this large portion here that you need to pocket. The key to that, I found, is to use your 1/4-inch bit. That's what I was using to make those cuts, but then on the pocketing I moved to a 1/2-inch bit, and that cleaned it up. I still see a little roughness, but it's much better than before. On the bottom, Same thing. This little flange is just an offset, right? If I believe this is now the 3x5 right here. So this was an offset, a pocket, and then right here was an offset, right? And again, sneaking up on that. The biggest struggle I had was the depth. Shaper technically does not cut to, well, I think they say an 1 3/4 inches, but you got to chuck that bit out pretty far. And I just barely made it, but it worked. It worked. I was nervous that it was gonna be too loose and I was gonna have a catastrophic issue, but I didn't. So it worked. When I got it out, I did not do any offsets from this standpoint, right? So this was 3x5, this was 3x5. It was very, very snug. At one point I was afraid I wasn't gonna be able to get it apart. I did that on purpose. I don't know if I would do that again. I thought the sanding would give me the level of difference. I had to take it to my rigid orbital sander with the bed, whatever that thing's called. And I had to sand here, 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 all the way around. You can see a little waviness here. I probably, if I would do it again, I would do a little offset. But the problem is you don't want too great of an offset, because if you get too great of an offset, you get slop, and then the bottom and the top don't necessarily match up. They'll be a little wobbly. This is just perfect in my mind. So what I did is once I got that sanded where it was acceptable to me to be able to open and close it, remember you're going to have some expansion in the summer, I then held this on that same orbital sander. It's the rigid, what is that thing? So it's an orbital belt sander. It's that orange machine. I'm looking at it right now, but I don't want to move the camera on you. And I just held that on the bed. That would sand both, right? Okay. Now, since you're routing this out of the wood, how do you do this? I've got my initials, and I've got this design. So Joe, the CEO, posted something on the community board that I thought was interesting. Basically, when you pop these out, you still have all the waste from this board, right? So imagine there's 2 holes here, right? And underneath there, you've got a waste board. Mine happened to be MDF. And you can kind of see the little cuttings in the MDF. So I was able to go just a little bit deeper and repeat that. And basically, this time, instead of an offset on this one, I cut right on this line, right? So I was cutting right here, and that allowed me to kind of place it and hold it there. And I used double-sided tape right here, but I knew that wherever I placed this on, as I was placing it back into that groove, that it was still perfectly aligned to the 3x5 inch rectangle that I had placed on the tool. So this face was going to be exactly where this face was, if that makes sense. So that worked. And then I went to the Noun Project, which is a website that Sam had suggested, royalty-free, commercially available, or whatever you call it, SVGs. And I downloaded this little leaf, I guess it's 6-leaf pattern. And then I moved to a 1/32 bit. And I posted this on the community board quite a bit. It requires an adapter. So the 1/32 bit is an 1/8 inch shank. If you look at my post, you'll see that there's an adapter on Amazon. And that bit in this machine is so darn precise, and it allowed me to pocket out. Actually, let me say that again. Allow me to cut the inside of those leaves, okay? I then switched to an 1/8 inch bit that comes from Schaefer and did the same inside cut, which just opened it up a little bit. And then I used that 1/8 inch bit to do the pocketing. And that gave me, I went down 0.15, okay? So imagine without the green, you've got a cap there that's got pocketed leaves in it. It looked really nice just by itself. And that's how you would do a wood inlay. You would then go do the same thing and outside cut on, say, a piece of maple or something like that. But I wanted to try something different. So I've got a friend who owns a company that makes epoxies, and I had been watching some videos on YouTube about how to use pigments. So I used his epoxy, which is a brand called Maz Epoxies. It's called Tabletop. And then I used some pigment from Jacquard Pearl-X, and I mixed them together, and I placed them in. There's a separate video on that, but just as a highlight, he coached me to lay a thin layer in first. Don't fill it all up, because the problem with epoxies is it draws air out of the wood and you get air bubbles. So if you do a big surface with tabletop epoxy, you need to do like a blowtorch over it to get the heat to raise those and bring them to the surface and pop out. I didn't want to chance that with this, so we put a little bit, I just brushed a little 1/16 of an inch, let it sit for several hours, and then I mixed up the green and poured it in proud. I mean, it was very high on here. And then I started sanding with the Festool random orbital bit, or a sander. Had a little bit of issue where I was starting to push some white residue from the sanding into the epoxy. So I stopped, let it sit for an hour, and then I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to see how this finished, and I went over again to the rigid belt sander, the random orbital belt sander. It's an oscillating, that's what it is, oscillating spindle sander, and this has a belt sander on it, so forgive me. And I just took it to it, and it came clean. And it was real foggy at first, but when I put just one coat of high gloss tung oil, it really popped up. But I really like that it's got different colors to it, because it looks like a real leaf. So there you have it. This is the front. I like this because you've got a little bit of the heartwood and the sapwood. This is technically walnut, although it looks pretty light on top. A lot of heartwood there, or sapwood there. I think it turned out nice. So can't be happier with the Origin. It just really is an amazing tool. And it's fun to make little things like this, right? This doesn't cost a lot. It still has some challenge to it, because you got to think about your offsets, and you're working with CAD a little bit here, and people really like this stuff, right, as gifts. So it was fun. Let me know if you have any questions. Appreciate it. After Woodworks on Facebook. Thanks.